Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
Why is food so expensive in this country? The cost of groceries, the price of filling the fridge, and keeping food on the table. It's been stretching Canadians' budgets for years now. And unfortunately, I have some more bad news for you today. The cost to feed a family of 4 is likely going up even more next year. In 2025, the average Canadian family can expect to spend about $16,800 on food. That's up about $800 from last year. Is there any end in sight? Will I ever buy steak again? I'm David Smith. Today on The Big Story, we're diving into the 2025 Canada Food Price Report with lead author Sylvain Charlebois. You may know him as the Food Professor. He's the head of the Agrifood Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University. Hi, Professor.
Hi, David.
So, the 2025 Canadian Food Price Report is out. We'll get into the numbers in a minute, but just off the top, what is the purpose of this report that you do every year?
Well, this is our 15th edition, and so our first edition was released back on December 2nd, 2009. And so I started the report with a good friend of mine, Francis Tapon, who was at Guelph with me. He's retired now. But we were basically having a beer and basically said we were talking about food prices and food inflation. And we realized a lot of people were confused about how prices are set in Canada. And because the supply chain economics are pretty complex. And there was just no report out there explaining to Canadians how things work, how to make the industry more transparent so you can actually connect the dots. And so that's what we did. So we basically built a dashboard, which is still in the report today. It basically influences and inspires our analysis all the way through. Obviously, we have the AI and econometrics that comes in as the conversation started, but really the dashboard is really how we frame our analysis. And so every year we try to forecast food prices based on the data, the evidence, and the factors that we actually consider as important for the coming year.
Right. So, what's the damage? What's the top line number? How much more to feed a family of 4 in Canada next year?
Yeah, so when you look at this year's forecast compared to other years, it is slightly above average. So you always hope that your models will tell you 1 to 3%. So that's really the sweet spot. But this year it's 3 to 5%. So we're expecting a family of 4 to spend probably around $800 more to feed itself over the next 12 months. So your food bill as a family would probably be around $16,800. Of course, you can dive into the report and reconstruct your own family. But for a family of 4, 2 kids, a boy and a girl, 2 adults, that's basically how your food bill should look like for 2025. And that's essentially pushed by 2 categories. One, meat. The meat trifecta is going to go up. So that would include chicken, pork, and beef. And also the other category that we're keeping a close eye on for 2025 are vegetables. We are expecting a low interest rates. And so when you see that happen, typically the currency actually dies, and so our grocers' buying power will be lessened. And we do import for well over $30 billion worth of food from the US alone. And so that 30 billion is likely to be more expensive, and a big part of that 30 billion are vegetables.
Okay, so meat, definitely meat, and likely vegetables as well. Any bargains out there? Anything looking better or at least the same?
I think so. I mean, because of what's going on with meat products, the conversion between beef and pork is well, it's typically high, But what's happening right now is that people are just looking for other options. So the conversion between beef and pork is on the rise, but also the conversion between beef and seafood is on the rise as well. And seafood we expect seafood to be a non-story in 2025. And so at least that's going to help. It is more expensive than average, but I do think because you're going to have might as well factor at the grocery store saying, well, if we're paying that much for beef, might as well look at seafood. So there's more traffic going to seafood. And the other, I think, interesting section of the grocery store I'll be watching is dairy. We see the Dairy Commission a few weeks ago decided to drop the price of farm milk and butterfat, the money given to farmers, and that's going to push less pressure on the dairy industry, dairy processors, and so on and so forth. So we are expecting more grocers to use the dairy section as a good place to put loss leaders there to attract more traffic into the store.
I don't know about you, Professor, but whenever butter is on sale, I fill my freezer with it. So that's good news.
That's a good thing. I mean, if you're a butter lover, I would say that really it's something that you may want to do more over the next little while. I think that there are, I mean, the one factor that I think we need to keep in mind when it comes to food prices, and this is something that is always extremely difficult to measure, and it's climate change. Climate change impacts our food prices all the time, up or down. And if you are to look on the upside, there are probably 4 different products that are likely going to become more expensive in 2025 due to climate change. One is beef. We talked about beef, and really the reason why beef is more expensive is that, well, feed got more expensive, and so farmers actually sold off their herd and prices went up. And when prices went up, they said, well, I'm done. They're cashing out. So right now, the beef herd size in Canada is basically the same as back in 1987.
Whoa.
If you can believe it. And we have 15 million more people to feed in Canada. In the US, it's even worse. It's the herd size there is the same size as what they had back in 1951. And so that's really something that we need to keep in mind when you look at beef prices. But so beef is one, coffee is another one. So you talked about butter stocking up. I do the same for coffee. If you're a coffee drinker, I consider doing that because it's gonna get more expensive. Chocolate, and the last one I would say is orange juice.
So beef, coffee, chocolate, butter. All the good things in life, hey? All the good things.
That's right. Well, butter, we don't think it's going to go up in price, but I'm here actually in Germany right now in Berlin, and my trips to Europe remind me of what butter used to taste like. So I'm very tempted to buy some butter here and bring it with me when I fly back to Canada tomorrow.
All right, as long as you declare it.
That's right, exactly.
So one of the things your report looks at, which I find absolutely fascinating, is behavior, not only consumer behavior, but behavior of corporations as well. So how are some of these prices influencing consumer behavior and the food retailing business?
Yeah, so there's an interesting game going on between consumers and grocers. To be honest, I actually think that grocers are dealing with a more strategic consumer base right now. Now, we've been doing the food price report for 15 years, and I have to admit, David, I don't think the Canes actually looked at prices as much 15 years ago than now. And you basically were asking people, how much is your butter? And people said, well, I don't know. Now they know. Like, they know that $9 a pound is expensive. They know that. And people are taking pictures, and they go to social media to actually inform the public. So Canadians, when they leave their homes, they're more informed, and they look up their phones to get data in real time as they shop around. And grocers are dealing with that. I mean, they know that they're losing traffic, they're losing loyalty. So loyalty is I think probably one of our grocers' most significant battleground right now because, well, Dollarama just announced that it's going to open up more than 100 stores next year. Costco has had 100 stores forever, and now it's opening up 4 or 5 stores now, and more are to come. So you can see that really the competitive landscape is changing and shifting, even though people are saying, well, there's no competition in Canada. Actually, there is within Canada. I think things are getting interesting for consumers for sure.
Okay. I want to dig into the weeds a little bit on what's driving some of these price increases. Your report lists some macroeconomic drivers for Canada food prices in 2025, starting with currencies and trade. The report says currencies and trade environment are likely to lead to a very significant price increases in 2025. Can you walk me through that?
Yes. Well, so again, we are expecting the dollar to drop as a result of lower interest rates. So that's going to impact obviously vegetables. Fruits, not so much. If you look at the report, actually, we're forecasting fruits to go up anywhere between 1 to 3%, which is the sweet spot. Because with fruits, you have more options. With vegetables, you have two external gardens to feed Canada. You got Arizona and California. And so the bulk of the vegetables that we buy come from those two states, and so. But if you're buying fruit, if say strawberries in California are too expensive, you can actually go elsewhere for a while. So that's why fruits are not exposed to currency fluctuations. But the currency is a big deal. It's a big deal, and everything is transacted with the American dollar around the world. And so if our dollar gets weaker, well, it you can see it at the grocery store.
Okay. What about the Trump tariff threat? 25% on all imports on the table. Well, would that have an impact on Canadian food prices?
Or shall we say the Trump hysteria in Canada?
Yeah. There is some of that.
I say, I mean, over the last 10 years, okay, our report has been accurate every year except 1 year. And that year was 2017. And in 2017, if you remember, David, it was the first year of Trump's first term as president. And in those days, we actually went through Trump hysteria as well. It's the same as now, tariffs, protectionism, and we fell for it as a group. We fell for it. We thought, oh my goodness, it's going. And that year, our report was read like there's no tomorrow. Our market reach is over 600 million people, and I think that year it reached 700 million. So it was a big deal, but we missed the boat completely. So we were expecting for inflation to reach 6%, it actually went down to 1.4%. So this year, our approach is a little bit more prudent and rational. So we think that what's happening right now in Washington is more noise than policy.
Okay, that's an interesting response. All right, I'll chew on that.
Believe it.
I'll chew on that. Well, no, there's lots of it's very up in the air right now. It's very up in the air. That is interesting.
Say that right now, Ottawa is dealing with the Trump hysteria correctly.
Okay,
I think. I do believe that Ottawa is responsive to what's happening in Washington. But when it comes to tariffs and food, Mr. Trump can easily hurt Americans more than Canadians. Very easily, because margins are so low in food. 10% would actually hurt Americans, let alone 25%. So in 2016, it was the same thing, and of course we saw Mr. Trump actually revise its position, and of course that led to our negotiation round with the new NAFTA. The COSMA deal, but I do think that this is a prelude to NAFTA 3.0. Basically, I think he wants to set the tone, and he only has 4 years, so he's got to be quick.
Closer to home, the federal carbon tax, one of the most polarizing policies we have in this country. I know you've been looking at that as well in other research. What impact does the federal carbon tax have on the price of food in Canada?
So we've actually recently published 2 papers in high rank journals, academic journals, and basically it was a two-phase process. The first paper was about what do we know? Like, what do we know about how the carbon tax or carbon pricing can impact food affordability? And the answer is that we don't know anything really. Um, and Canada really never did any homework on that before implementing the carbon tax in 2019, which was to me was very concerning because if you want to move forward with a policy as important as this one, you may want to you may want to assess whether or not that policy will impact the industry that everyone relies on to feed themselves. I mean, that's really important. It never happened. And the second paper was about how the carbon tax can actually impact food prices. And in that, during that exercise, we quickly realized that any studies, any economists, anyone saying, okay, uh, that the carbon tax is impacting food retail prices one way or another, whether they say it's not having an impact or that it's having an impact, I don't know where they get their data, but their analysis is essentially flawed because we realize that in retail, a lot of things can actually influence prices. Behavior, the weather, we talked about loss leading. We talked about promotions. A lot of things can actually impact retail prices. So it's impossible to correlate this really gigantic policy affecting the entire supply chain with retail prices in the end. However, and this is really where supply chain economics come in, wholesale prices are more exposed to these policies because of their nature. I mean, wholesale prices are easily influenced by energy costs, fluctuations, anything that could actually impact the cost to produce anything. And so we focused on wholesale prices, and what we actually found out is that since 2019, wholesale food prices in Canada have actually increased by almost 40% more than in the US. So, in other words, our agri-food sector in Canada is less competitive than in the US since 2019. And we believe that the carbon tax is one factor, one of many factors, based on the analysis that we actually conducted. And in January, I'm a special editor of an issue looking at carbon pricing in supply chains, food supply chains with trends in food science. I'm an editor for that particular journal. And we actually are publishing 11 academic papers showing that. So I do think that the conversation around the carbon tax should be around our industry's competitiveness. And right now we're falling way behind, compelling grocers to import more from elsewhere than buying our own food that we produce right at home.
That's very interesting. Compels grocers to import more food, which opens up the supply chain to some of those other macro factors that we talked about earlier, interest rates, currency.
Which makes things even worse.
Right.
And eventually, over time, if you actually make your agri-food sector less competitive, well, eventually that leads to a more food insecure market. And that's what I've said to Parliament twice now at Finance and Agriculture. And I said that yesterday at Senate as well.
Outside of the carbon tax, are there any policy responses to the cost of food that government in Canada could consider?
Well, the one thing I said to Senate yesterday was to eliminate all sales tax at retail. That would be a start. Because I do believe that taxing food is immoral, and it's just regressive. And I point to Newfoundland as a good case study for that. A couple of years ago, Newfoundland decided to tax soda pop, and over the last 2 years, so the first year, the Newfoundland government actually got $6.1 million in revenues from soda pop. Now it's up to 12 million. So they're actually making money, which means that they're selling more pop.
Right.
Despite the tax. You know why? It's simple. The supply chain absorbed the tax to keep similar price points so consumers can continue to buy the pop. So that's That's why taxing food is always a bad idea. No matter what food it is, it's always a bad idea. Let the consumer decide what is good for them. And at the end of the day, with education, you will, you will entice people to make proper decisions. Let the market decide. Taxing food is ridiculous. And this is why we're having this GST holiday conversation, which I think is just bad fiscal policy.
Right. What I'm trying to get at a little bit as well is a lot of the political discourse, just public discourse about the cost of living, especially about food, has come down to a sort of us versus them, people versus corporations, government versus corporations. What capacity does the federal government or any level of government have to influence the cost of food at the store?
Well, I mean, the role of government to me is to, and this is what I said to Minister Champagne last year when we were working with him on food inflation, and we met the Big Five in Ottawa and all that. So he got the photo op he wanted, which is great. But at the end of the day, the role of government is not to pick up the phone and dial for grocers to come into the market. I mean, on Wednesday, I was speaking to economists right here in Berlin, and one economist, I was talking about food inflation, and one economist actually rose his hands, and he said, well, clearly, food prices have gone up in Germany. And by the way, food inflation was at 20% for a while in Germany. He said, well, clearly, food prices have gone up in Germany because Aldi and Lidl are gouging consumers. And so I laughed because I said, well, guess what? In Canada, we're hearing the same thing about Loblaw and Sobeys and Metro. So, and when you look at the data, when you spend some time looking at the data, there's no gouging going on. These companies are making money selling other things than food, which is often forgotten. So, but competitiveness is a problem. Of course, it's a problem in Canada. So the role of government is to enable conditions in order for competition to increase, not to artificially raise competition. That's one thing. The other thing, and of course, the other thing is to make sure that players actually follow the rules. The bread cartel is a complete disaster and an insult to all Canadians. It should have never happened. And I do believe that there is some price fixing going on in Canada, but you need to do the work and prove it. The bread price fixing scandal, the investigation has been going on for 9 years. In the US, after 3 months, they actually sentence executives and they send them to jail. This is what happened with the canned tuna case in the US. 40 months of jail and $100,000 as a fine. We don't take price fixing seriously in Canada at all. And there are some rumors around frozen French fries right now in the US. There's a lawsuit going on, including 2 Canadian companies, McCain and Cavendish. Nothing is going on in Canada. So if you start with stronger oversight, it will help. Property controls. You got grocers out there buying land, making sure that the other guy doesn't build a store right next to their own store. Or you'll see a tenant, a grocer being the main tenant of a strip mall, and in the lease, it's asking the landlord not to allow any other food retailer close to the store. These practices need to stop.
Okay. We're coming to the end of our time today. What's the outlook here? Before this interview today, I went back and I read the last 5 food price reports. Since 2019, the cost of feeding a family of 4 has increased about $7,500 in Canada. Yep. Should Canadians just expect that food is going to take up a greater portion of their income in the medium to short-term outlook?
I asked myself the same question. So food prices are going up. Is it taking more than before? So in 2019, the portion was 9.1%. Now it's up to 9.3%. It's not that bad. It's not that bad. I know that it doesn't feel like it. The problem is that everything has gone up as well at the same time. And that's why people are showing up at the grocery store with less money. So they're trading down. So it's painful to go to the grocery store.
Okay.
And because it's painful, people are pointing fingers and they're asking for change. So it's totally normal. But we're living through the 80s again. The early 80s, when I was a kid, we didn't buy anything if it wasn't on sale. We're going through the same process and we're going to get out of it. But things aren't that bad. But people don't want to hear it. They just want to, take pictures and go to social media and scream.
Well, can you blame them? Can you blame them?
No, I can't. I'm a consumer as well. I'm a father. I have 4 kids. Yeah. I've seen the prices. Yeah.
All right. Well, food for thought there at the end. That's very interesting. Sylvain Charlebois, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure.
Take care, David. Happy holidays.
Again, that is Sylvain Charlebois, head of the Agrifood Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University, the lead author on this year's Canadian Food Price Report. If you're interested about some of the more technical details and elements in that report, you can check out Sylvain's own podcast, The Food Professor Podcast. Much more technical and in-depth if you're interested in that sort of stuff. I'm David Smith. That's all for the Big Story podcast today. A reminder again about the Seeker app. It's the best way to listen to the Big Story. Trust me, Seeker, Seekr. It's a great new listening experience that we have for you. Podcasts and radio all in one place. That's the Seeker app, Seekr. Seeker. That's it for me. Until next time, thank you for listening.